63 Quay, shy-shouldered Daniel waited until his son was away on a business trip, then quietly slipped into his daughter Sinmanis Law's room. Claire pretended to be asleep. She didn't resist. Instead, she offered him a single condition. The night was ink minus black, the air thick with tense, forbidden desire. Moonlight slipped through a narrow gap in the curtains and fell across the head of Claire's bed. Her eyes were tightly shut, yet her breathing had grown quick and shallow. A faint breeze outside masked the soft creak of footsteps on the floorboards. Daniel, 60-3, pushed open the door to his daughter, Minus Law's bedroom without a sound. His eyes gleamed in the darkness, hesitation flickering across his face before raw impulse drove him closer to the bed. Claire had heard the faint click of the door the moment it opened, but she remained motionless, eyelids never lifting. She knew exactly what her father Minus and Law intended, yet she chose to feign sleep. Inside, her heart twisted with conflicting emotions. She and her husband Alex had been married for 5 years. Their life together was calm, almost colorless. Alex was a decent man, but his job kept him constantly traveling. For months at a time, the house held only her and Daniel, the two of them living under the same roof. Daniel had always been attentive, cooking, washing clothes, handling every small detail with more care than her own husband. She had once been deeply grateful for that warmth, but in recent months, the way he looked at her had begun to unsettle her. There was a heat in his gaze that could no longer be ignored. Tonight, the line had finally been crossed. Daniel stood beside the bed and whispered, his voice low and testing, "Claire, are you asleep?" Claire gave no answer. She only shifted slightly, as if turning in her sleep. She was gambling, wondering whether he would actually dare to go further. A strange mix of fear, curiosity, and even a dark thrill of revenge stirred inside her, revenge against her husband's indifference, against the dullness of her days. Seeing that she didn't stir, Angel grew bolder. He sat down carefully on the edge of the bed. The mattress dipped with a soft creak. His hand moved slowly toward her back, testing her limits. Claire's heart pounded so violently she thought it might burst. Yet she stayed perfectly still. Then, without warning, she opened her eyes and stared straight at him. "Dad," she said in a calm, icy whisper, "what do you think you're doing?" Daniel flinched, his hand frozen in mid-stare. Panic flashed across his face. I just came to check on you," he stammered. "I was afraid you might feel cold at night." Claire let out a cold laugh and sat up. Her gaze cut like a blade. "Stop pretending. You don't sneak into my room in the middle of the night just to tuck me in." Daniel was speechless, his face burning red. He could not find a single word in his defense. Claire did not press him further. Instead, her tone shifted, carrying a hint of teasing. "Dad, I won't scream. I won't make a scene, and I won't tell Alex. But I have one condition." Daniel stared at her, eyes wide with shock. What condition?" The corner of Claire's mouth curved into a meaningful smile. "Tomorrow, you're going to come with me somewhere and help me with something. It's something only you can do for me." Daniel swallowed hard, his mind reeling. He had never expected her to stay so composed, let alone bargain with him. He had imagined an impulsive, dangerous encounter. Instead, he now found himself being led by the nose. "Claire, what exactly do you want me to do?" he asked uneasily. Claire did not answer directly. "You'll find out tomorrow," she said coolly. "Now get out." Her voice left no room for argument. Daniel hesitated for a moment, then shuffled out of the room like a beaten dog. The moment the door clicked shut, Claire released a long breath and leaned back against the headboard, her eyes dark and unreadable. She knew tonight was only the beginning. The real storm was still to come. The next morning, sunlight poured into the living room. Aniel sat on the sofa, cradling a cup of tea, his gaze drifting repeatedly toward Claire in the kitchen. She moved about preparing breakfast with practiced ease, as if nothing had happened the night before. His heart was in turmoil, eager to know what her condition was, yet terrified she might change her mind and expose him. Several times he opened his mouth to ask, but each time her calm, steady glance silenced him. After breakfast, Claire changed into neat, practical clothes, picked up her bag, and said simply, "Let's go." Daniel blinked. "Where?" Claire only smiled without answering. "Just come with me." The two of them left the house and got into a taxi. The car wove through the city streets and gradually headed toward the outskirts. Daniel grew more and more anxious. "Claire, what exactly do you need my help with?" Claire turned to him, her eyes deep and unreadable. "Dad, haven't you always wanted to prove how good you are to me? Today is your chance." The taxi finally stopped in front of an old, run-down residential area. Before them stood a shabby two-story building, its walls peeling, windows thick with dust. Claire stood at the foot of the building and gazed up at a window on the second floor. A complicated emotion flickered across her face. She turned to Daniel and said, "Dad, this matter concerns my past. If you help me, I promise no one will ever hear about last night." Daniel felt a jolt in his chest. He sensed that things were far more complicated than he had imagined. Watching her back as she started up the stairs, he suddenly realized that this daughter, Hamamias law of his, was far more intricate than he had ever suspected. Daniel followed Claire up the creaking stairs of the dilapidated little building, each step sending a fresh wave of dread through his body. The narrow wooden stairs creaked underfoot as if they might give way at any moment. A damp, musty smell hung in the air, laced with the faint trace of tobacco drifting from somewhere unseen. Claire moved ahead with steady, determined steps, her back straight and resolute, as though she had already made up her mind about something irrevocable. Daniel followed close behind, palms slick with sweat, his mind replaying the events of the previous night. He had no idea what Claire intended to show him here, but every instinct warned him this was far from simple. The second-floor hallway was dim, lit only by a single flickering old bulb that cast weak, unsteady light. Yellowed newspapers clung to the walls, and corners were cluttered with random junk, the heavy atmosphere pressing down like a weight on the chest. Claire stopped before a peeling wooden door. A rusted iron lock hung crookedly on the frame, already pried open. He turned to look at Daniel, his eyes complex, part warning, part plea. "Dad, no matter what you see or hear in a moment, don't make a sound, okay?" Daniel swallowed hard and nodded, his heart hammering like a trapped rabbit. He wanted to ask questions, but Claire had already pushed the door open. Beyond it lay a cramped living room. The furniture was old and worn, the sofa thick with dust. Several battered cardboard boxes were stacked in one corner, filling the space with a stale, decaying odor. The room appeared empty, yet on the table sat a stack of yellowed letters beside an antique radio that crackled with intermittent static. Claire stepped inside, his gaze sweeping over the letters. His expression shifted subtly. He crouched down and gently picked up one envelope. It bore no name, but the handwriting was elegant and strangely familiar. In a low voice he asked, "Dad, do you know why I brought you here?" Daniel shook his head, his throat too dry to speak. Claire continued, "This house is where I lived as a child. After my mother passed, my father brought me here. We stayed until I turned 18, and then he was gone too." Daniel froze, stunned that he would suddenly speak of his past. He knew Claire's parents had died young, but Alex had never gone into detail, and he had never dared to press. Claire's eyes grew distant, lost in memory. "When my father left, he left behind these letters. Every one was written to my mother. I've never opened them. I was afraid of learning things I couldn't bear." He paused, then looked up at Daniel. "Dad, last night when you came into my room, I didn't scream or fight back. It wasn't because I was scared of you, or because I'm weak. I just needed someone to help me face the secrets inside these letters. And you? You owe me." Daniel's heart jolted. He sensed that whatever Claire wanted from him carried far more weight than he had imagined. Tentatively he asked, "Claire, what exactly do these letters say?" Instead of answering, he took a small knife from his bag and carefully slit open the envelope. As the letter unfolded, his hand trembled slightly, as if terrified the contents would upend his entire life. In a hushed voice he began to read. "My dearest, I know you hate me, but I have never regretted what I did. If it weren't for Claire, I would never have taken this path." His voice cut off abruptly. He jerked his head up, a flash of terror in his eyes. Daniel stood motionless beside him, barely daring to breathe. He could feel it, these letters concealed an enormous secret, one that might concern not only Claire's past but could reach into his own present life as well. Unable to hold back, he asked, "Claire, what exactly did your father do?" Claire clenched his jaw, his voice low and heavy. "Back then, my father was a gambler. He owed a mountain of debt. To pay it off, he got involved in things that could never see the light of day. Later, he suddenly disappeared. I always believed he had been killed by debt collectors. But these letters, they seem to be telling me he didn't die." The words hit Daniel like a bomb. His eyes widened, his mind spinning in chaos. "Didn't die? Then where is he now?" Claire shook his head, despair flickering in his gaze. "I don't know. But I have a feeling the answer is hidden in these letters, and I need you to help me uncover it." He paused, his eyes turning icy. Dad, you were so bold last night. Now, do you dare to stay with me and see this through to the end?" Daniel's pulse raced, his throat tight. He knew he had no way out. Last night's reckless impulse had left him completely under Claire's control, and whatever this secret turned out to be, it felt like an invisible net drawing him and his daughter-in-law tightly together. Outside, the wind suddenly picked up, rattling the windows with a hollow bang, as if warning of an even greater storm on the way. Claire put the letter away and looked at Daniel. "Dad, today is only the beginning. We'll have to come back tomorrow. There are other things in this house still waiting for us." The moment his words faded, the old radio let out a sharp burst of static, like a distant, chilling whisper. Daniel stared at Claire's back and, for the first time, felt that his daughter Minas Imshlaw was an enigma. He didn't know whether he was being used, but he understood one thing clearly: once this had begun, there was no stopping it. Night once again settled over the dilapidated little building. Claire and Daniel returned to the dilapidated little building again the next evening. The dying glow of the sunset filtered through the gaps in the torn curtains, casting mottled patterns of light across the floor. The air still carried the damp, musty smell, but today it felt heavier, as if the room harbored some unspeakable secret that watched them from the shadows. Claire stood in the center of the living room, clutching the letter she had opened the day before. Her expression was complex, as though she were battling some invisible fear. Daniel stood behind her, nervously rubbing his hands together. The reckless impulse from last night had long since been replaced by unease. A chill now ran down his spine. Claire turned around, her gaze falling on the pile of old cardboard boxes in the corner. She took a deep breath, as if steeling herself for something, and spoke to Daniel in a low voice. "Dad, today we need to go through all these boxes. The things my father left behind can't be just that letter." Her voice was low and carried an unquestionable firmness. Daniel hesitated for a moment, then nodded stiffly. Okay, Claire, whatever you say, well, do it." He agreed with his mouth, but his heart was pounding. He had an uneasy feeling that these boxes might contain more than just memories, truths he had no desire to touch. The two of them began opening the first box. It was filled with old clothes and miscellaneous items that gave off a pungent odor. Claire searched quickly, as if desperate to find something. Daniel moved slowly, his eyes frequently darting toward her, trying to read any clues from her expression. The second box contained old books and ledgers. The pages were covered with dense rows of numbers, records of what appeared to be transactions. Claire flipped through a few pages, her brows knitting tighter and tighter. These accounts, to her confusion, they looked like records of my father's gambling debts from back then. She pointed to one page where messy handwriting noted, "O Henry 50,000 yuan. March 1998. Daniel leaned it to look, and his face changed slightly. Henry. The name sounded familiar. He frowned, racking his brain, but cowed at recall where he had heard it. Claire let out a cold laugh. Dad, you've been living in this city for so many years. You can't possibly not know who Henry is. He was the local tyrant in this area back then, the one who specialized in high loans. Aniel's heart jolted. He vaguely remembered the rumors Henry was a ruthless man. It was said that many who owed him money eventually vanished without a trace. Claire said nothing more and continued searching the boxes. The third one finally held something different, a stack of photographs, their yellowed edges bearing the marks of time. She picked up one photo. It showed a young woman holding a little girl. The background was the open space in front of this very building. The woman's smile was gentle, and the little girl nestled in her arms, laughing with innocent joy. Claire's fingers gently traced the photo, her voice barely audible. "This is my mom and me." Anne leaned closer. In the picture, Claire was only 4 or 5 years old. Her eyes bright and clear, nothing like the person she was now. "She left early. I barely have any memories of her." Claire's voice trembled slightly. "My father said she died of illness, but now I suspect it was that simple." She picked up another photograph. This one showed a man with his back to the camera, standing in a dimly lit alley. Beside him was a blurry figure, as if they were in conversation. Daniel stared at the photo. Suddenly, the man's back looked somewhat familiar, though he couldn't place it. Claire's gaze, however, fixed on a detail in the corner of the image. At the man's feet was a black leather bag with a faint carved mark on it, some kind of special symbol. She frowned and murmured to herself, "This bag, I feel like I've seen it somewhere before." She suddenly looked up at Daniel. "Dad, tell me honestly, did you know my father back then? Or Henry?" Her eyes were sharp, as if ready to cut open his thoughts. Daniel was caught off guard, cold sweat breaking out on his forehead. He stammered, "I am just an ordinary worker. How could I know any local gangsters?" "Claire, don't overthink it." But his eyes darted away, unable to meet hers. Claire noticed and felt even more suspicion growing inside her. She didn't press further. Instead, she pulled a small iron box from the pile. It was locked and covered in rust. She tried to pry it open with her hands but failed, so she handed it to Daniel. "Dad, help me open this." Daniel took the box, his hands trembling. He found a rusty screwdriver and, with some effort, pried it open. Inside were scattered items: an old watch, a few crumpled bills, and a small black notebook. Claire eagerly opened the notebook. It was filled with messy handwriting, like a diary. She flipped through several pages, her face growing darker and darker. One entry read, May 1999. "Henry threatened me I must pay off the last debt, or Claire would be in danger. I had no choice but to do as he said." Claire's hand shook violently. The notebook nearly slipped from her grasp. She looked up at Daniel, her voice filled with anger. "Dad, how dare you say you know nothing? What exactly did my father do back then? And who is Henry?" Daniel was frightened by her intensity and took a step back, waving his hands frantically. "Claire, I really don't know. I am just an outsider. I didn't get involved in these things." But his eyes betrayed him. Flickering with panic, he cowed and hid. Claire stared at him coldly and slowly rose to her feet. Claire gave him one last chance, her voice as cold as steel. "Dad, this is your final opportunity. Tomorrow we're coming back here to get to the bottom of all this. If you don't want to help me, I don't mind telling Alex exactly what happened last night." Her tone was icy, like a blade hanging over Daniel's head. His heart clenched tight. He knew he was completely trapped. "Fine," he muttered hoarsely. "I'll come with you. But Claire, if this really involves Henry, we have to be careful. That kind of man isn't someone we can afford to provoke." Outside, the wind howled louder, rattling the windows violently. The old radio crackled again, spitting out broken, range-like static and a few indistinct words. Claire stood motionless, gripping the black notebook so tightly her knuckles turned white. A look of grim resolve burned in her eyes. She knew the secrets of this old house were beginning to unravel, and both she and Daniel had been dragged into a vortex they could no longer escape. The night wind shrieked as the windows of the dilapidated little building creaked and groaned, as if whispering the truths long buried within its walls. Claire stood in the dim living room, clutching the notebook, her expression a turbulent mix of rage, fear, and a strange, unspoken anticipation. Daniel stood behind her, head bowed, hands twisting together anxiously. The recklessness of last night and today's discoveries had left him on edge. He wanted to say something, but Claire's gaze was so frigid it forced the words back down his throat. She flipped to the next page. The handwriting was still messy, but the words made her pulse race. June 1999. I took Henry's money and did that thing. No one knows the truth, but at least Claire's safety is secured. I can only keep hiding until this all blows over. She slammed the notebook shut and looked up at Daniel, her voice low and oppressive. Dad, you really know nothing about what my father was involved in back then? What exactly do these words mean? Her eyes were like knives, ready to slice open his soul. Daniel broke into a cold sweat, his gaze darting away. Claire, I really don't know the people your father associated with back then. I'm just an ordinary old man. How could I have gotten mixed up in all that mess? His voice lacked any real conviction. Even he could hear how weak it sounded. Claire let out a cold laugh and didn't press further. Instead, she turned and rummaged through another pile of old cardboard boxes, pulling out a yellowed envelope. Inside was a faded, hand-drawn map marking an abandoned factory area, with a few blurry characters scrawled beside a transaction site. She frowned, murmuring to herself, "Did my father really go here back then?" Then she looked at Daniel, her tone probing. "Dad, you've lived in this city for decades. Do you know if that old factory area was involved in any shady dealings?" Oh, Daniel froze, a flash of panic crossing his face. He waved his hands quickly. "How would I know anything about that?" "Claire, don't start imagining things. Those old factories have been deserted for years. There's nothing there." Claire ignored his evasive answers and studied the map carefully, her mind racing. She vaguely remembered that when she was little, her father would sometimes slip out in the middle of the night and return exhausted, his eyes clouded with a disturbing darkness. She had never asked questions then, but now it seemed those late, night outings were almost certainly connected to this map. She folded the map away and turned to Daniel. "Dad, tomorrow we're going to check out this place. I have a feeling the answers are there." Daniel's face turned deathly pale the moment he heard her. "Claire, why would we go to a desolate place like that in the middle of nowhere? Besides, it's been over 20 years. What clues could possibly still be left?" His voice was thick with resistance, but Claire's gaze was as unyielding as nails, pinning him in place with nowhere to hide. "Where did all that courage from last night go?" she said coldly. "You don't have to help me if you don't want to. I won't force you. But don't forget you owe me." Those words hit him like a hammer. Daniel fell silent, unable to respond. The night grew even darker. As the two left the little building, heavy clouds had gathered overhead and distant thunder rumbled faintly. Claire walked ahead, clutching the map and notebook, her steps firm yet weighed down with heaviness. Daniel followed behind, a crushing stone pressing on his chest. He knew this matter was sinking deeper and deeper, and he was now tightly bound by Claire's secrets, unable to escape or hide. The car sped through the darkness, streetlight flickering across Claire's face. Her eyes burned with grim determination, as if she were ready to tear open every scar from the past. The next morning dawned gray and drizzly. Claire and Daniel drove out to the abandoned factory marked on the map. It sat on a desolate patch of land on the city outskirts, overgrown with wild weeds. The factory walls were covered in creeping vines, looking like a haunted ruin. The rusted main gate hung halfbun, creaking sharply whenever the wind blew. Claire pushed the gate open and stepped inside. Daniel hesitated for a moment before forcing himself to follow. The interior was empty and cavernous. containing only a few broken steel beams and piles of rubble. The air was thick with the smell of rust and decay, making it hard to breathe. Claire swept her flashlight around until her gaze finally settled on a rusty metal cabinet in one corner. Its door was ajar, stuffed with yellowed documents and some old, worn tools. She walked over and began flipping through a stack of papers, ledgers filled with accounts, interspersed with several photographs. Claire held up one of the photographs and passed it to Daniel. In the image, a man's back was visible as he stepped out of a black sedan, carrying the leather bag marked with that distinctive symbol. Daniel took the photo, his hand trembling slightly. His face darkened even further. "Claire, I really don't know this person," he muttered, but his voice betrayed him with obvious panic. Even Claire could hear the crack in it. "You don't know him?" Claire gave a cold laugh and stepped closer, crowding him. "Dad, let me tell you a story. Back then, my father took on some dirty work for Henry to pay off his debts. Among the things he left behind before he disappeared, he kept mentioning an old partner, someone who helped him a lot but also left him holding the bag. Do you think that old partner could have been you?" Her tone was calm, yet the words struck Daniel like a blade straight to the heart. His face drained of color. Sweat rolled down his forehead. He staggered back a step, voice shaking. "Claire, don't talk nonsense. How could I possibly be that kind of person?" But his eyes darted away, unable to hold her gaze, the lie plain to see. Claire said nothing more. She simply stared at him, her gaze devouring. After a long moment she spoke again, softly. "Dad, I won't force you to tell the truth, but this place holds my father's secrets, and maybe yours too. I'm going to keep looking, even if I have to tear this whole building apart." She turned away and continued rifling through the stack of papers, leaving Daniel standing there, legs so weak he could barely stay upright. The rain grew heavier. Water dripped through holes in the factory roof, striking the dusty floor with sharp, clear sounds. Claire's silhouette in the dim light looked both lonely and unyielding. A chill rose from the soles of Daniel's feet. He knew the storm had already begun and could no longer be stopped. Rainwater continued to fall through the broken roof, hitting the dusty ground in a monotonous patter. In the gloomy light, Claire crouched in front of the rusted metal cabinet, her fingers rapidly sorting through the yellowed documents. Each page seemed to whisper of buried history. Her face remained expressionless, but her eyes burned with stubborn determination. She would not stop until she uncovered the truth. Daniel stood a few steps away, leaning against a broken steel beam. His face was deathly pale, and his fingers unconsciously clutched the hem of his shirt. He wanted to persuade her to leave, but something seemed to block his throat. No words would come out. Claire pulled a tattered receipt from the pile. It read July 1999. Received 100 yuan in cash. Transaction complete. The signature at the bottom was messy, but the character Zhao was recognizable. She frowned and murmured to herself, 100,000 yuan. Where would my father have gotten that kind of money back then? She looked up at Daniel, her gaze sharp as a knife. "Dad, don't you think this money came from Henry? What exactly did my father do for him to earn this?" Her voice was not loud, yet it struck Daniel like a heavy hammer, making his heart jolt. Daniel waved his hands frantically, his voice hoarse. "Claire, I really don't know. Stop staring at me like that. Your father and I, we weren't that close back then." But his eyes flickered even more wildly, and sweat beads glistened on his forehead in the dim light. Claire let out another cold laugh and asked no further questions. She kept searching. At the very bottom of the cabinet lay a dented iron box, its lid covered in scratches as if someone had deliberately smashed it. She pried it open with effort. Inside was only one neatly folded sheet of paper. On it was written a single line: "If I don't come back, tell Claire to stay far away from Henry." Claire's hand jerked violently. The paper slipped from her fingers and fluttered to the ground. She froze, as if the words had pinned her in place, her mind going blank. Daniel quickly bent down and picked up the paper. After one glance, his face grew even uglier. "Claire, this, This might be the last words your father left. Stop investigating. Nothing good will come from digging deeper, he said, a note of pleading in his voice. But Claire seemed not to hear him. She shot to her feet, fury blazing in her eyes. Nothing good? Dad, do you really think I can turn back now? My father has been missing for over 20 years. My mother died under mysterious circumstances. This house, this factory, they're all hiding secrets. How do you expect me to stop? She snatched the paper back, clutching it tightly, and strode deeper into the factory. Daniel hesitated for a second, then forced himself to follow. At the rear of the factory was an iron ladder leading down to the basement. The rungs were badly rusted, creaking with every step. Claire switched on her phone's flashlight. The beam swept through the darkness, revealing a basement cluttered with junk old wood uncrates scattered across the floor, rusted iron barrels, and in one corner a pile of charred remains, as if something had been burned there. Claire's attention was caught by a piece of tattered cloth in the corner. Something metallic glinted faintly beneath it. She walked over and pulled the cloth aside, exposing an old-fashioned safe. The symbol carved on its door was identical to the one on the leather bag in the photographs. She tried turning the combination dial, but it refused to move. Angel stood behind her and said in a low voice, "Claire, this thing won't open. It's been so many years. Even if there was anything inside, it's probably useless now." Claire ignored him. She crouched down and examined the safe carefully. Next to the door, a line of faint characters had been scratched into the metal with a knife. Claire, 1999. Her heart jolted. She whispered under her breath, This is what my father left for me." She tried her own birthday as the password. With a soft click, the safe door swung open. Inside was only a manila envelope. It contained a stack of cash, a rusted key, and an unsealed letter. Claire's hands trembled as she opened it. The message was short, just a few lines. "Claire, if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it back. The money is for you enough to leave this city. The key is to the old house. Everything you need to know is inside. Don't go looking for Henry. Don't dig any deeper. Just stay alive." There was no signature, but the handwriting was unmistakably her father's. Claire's eyes reddened, tears welling up, but she bit down hard on her lip and refused to let them fall. She turned to Daniel, her voice strained and low, pressed out from deep in her throat. "Dad, are you still going to pretend you know nothing?" She held up the rusted key, her gaze carrying one last flicker of hope. "Do you recognize this?" Daniel stared at the key, his face drained of color, as if she had struck a raw nerve. He took a sudden step back, his voice shaking. "Claire, I really don't know anything about this key. I swear I don't know anything about your father's business." But his reaction had already betrayed him. Claire gave a cold, bitter smile. She put away the letter and the key, then stood up. "Dad, tomorrow we're going back to the old house. We're going to put the last piece of the puzzle together. If you refuse to go, I won't mind telling Alex everything that happened last night along with all these little secrets." Her tone was calm, yet it cut like an invisible blade, leaving Daniel nowhere to hide. He lowered his head. Sweat dripped onto the floor. His voice was barely audible. "Claire, why must you do this? Some things are better left unknown." Claire ignored him. She turned and climbed the iron ladder, her silhouette lonely yet resolute against the dim light. The rain was still falling. Thunder rumbled closer outside the factory, as if warning of an even greater storm to come. Daniel stood frozen in place, his legs so weak he could hardly move. He watched Claire's retreating figure as countless buried memories surged back like restless ghosts. He knew that returning to the old house tomorrow would unearth the secret he had fought desperately to keep hidden, and that he no longer had any way out. The next morning after the rain, the air carried the sharp scent of wet earth. The outline of the old house loomed faintly through the thin mist. Claire and Daniel stood in front of the dilapidated little building. The iron lock on the door had already been pried open, revealing a weathered wooden door that looked like an entrance to another world. Claire gripped the rusted key tightly, her expression cold and determined, as if she had steeled herself for whatever lay ahead. Daniel followed a few steps behind, his face even paler than the day before, his footsteps unsteady like a puppet on strings. Several times he wanted to beg her to turn back, but every time he met her icy gaze, the words died in his throat. Claire pushed the door open. A musty smell rushed out, mixed with the faint, stale odor of old tobacco. The living room looked exactly as it had the day before, shabby furniture covered in thick dust. A radio in the corner crackled with intermittent static, like whispering ghosts. She walked straight toward the second floor. The key felt warm in her palm, as if guiding her to some final destination. Daniel dragged his heavy steps behind her, his heart pounding like thunder. He knew the truth waiting today could destroy everything. At the end of the second mammoth-floor hallway was a small locked door. Deep scratches marked the wood, as though someone had once tried to force it open. Claire inserted the key into the lock. With a click, it turned. Behind the door was a narrow storage room cluttered with junk. In the corner stood an old wooden chest, its lid carved with the same symbol as the safe. She knelt down and opened it. Inside lay only a thick ledger and a letter. The envelope read to Claire. Claire's hands shook slightly as she tore it open. The familiar handwriting of her father stared back at her. "Claire, if you're rereading this letter again, it means you've grown up and found these things. I never wanted you to know any of this, but if you insist on digging, I can't stop you. In 1999, I did one last job for Henry in exchange for your safety. The money in the safe is enough for you to start a new life. Don't hate me, and don't hate Daniel either. He was just a reluctant bystander, forced into it. Stay alive. Leave this city." Claire's breath caught. She jerked her head up and stared at Daniel, her eyes filled with shock and fury. "Dad, the letter says you knew about my father's business. Who exactly are you?" Daniel's face turned ashen. His lips trembled, all strength drained from his body. He collapsed to the floor and whispered hoarsely, "Claire, I never meant to hurt your father. I only helped him once." His voice carried the despair of a man confessing his final words. Claire let out a cold laugh that sounded like shards of ice. "Once? Then explain exactly what happened." Daniel kept his head down, his voice almost inaudible. "Back then, your father owed Henry a debt. He had nowhere left to turn. Henry asked me to keep an eye on him. He said once your father finished the job,